the outermost layer, the corneum, and corn. Have you ever known somebody who had like a corn on their foot? Okay, it's a very roughened place of skin, and therefore this layer is a very rough layer. Note, once again, in each of these layers, they're trying to show us that they are several layers thick, okay? The corneum, the outermost layer, superficial layer, is a very tough layer, several layers thick. Our cells are now very flat. We don't see nuclei present. At this point, these are dead cells. They have a hard protein envelope around them. They contain keratin and are surrounded by lipids. So these 5 layers are working really hard to make sure that we don't get anything through that basement membrane. Okay?
Confused on what it means by cornified. Does that mean just rough?
Cornified means tough.
Okay.
That was the picture that we were referring to, that I had you guys pick up. So, in labeling, this is something I would want you to be able to label, okay? I want you to know those layers, and I want you to know how to be able to label them, as well as being able to answer questions about these layers. Which one would be having a high mitotic rate, for example? If you were asked which layer carries out high rates of mitosis, what would be your answer? Huh? The basally. And, well, that's what you, and germinativum. Be familiar with germinativum, because that simply means germinate. And germinate means being able to give rise to. Okay? So if I were to ask which layer is hard and cornified, if we were to use our term, what would you want to tell me?
Stratum corneum.
Stratum corneum. Okay? If you were asked in which layer would proteins begin to look like a spine? Spinosum. Okay? So I would want you to be able to be familiar with that. Okay?
Now, will we also need to know how to label like what the desmosomes are and the glandular bodies?
I would want you to be familiar with, for example, those desmosomes. And if you were asked why they were important, okay, you would want to be able to know that it's because they're creating these junctions that materials cannot pass. Okay? Probably be familiar with like labeling a lamellar body, a keratin fiber, the protein envelope, which is just surrounding the cells, and that intracellular lipid. Did somebody make a note of that for me? Okay.
I got it.
All right, be able to do the intracellular lipids, the lamellar body, the protein envelope, a keratin fiber, and the desmosome and hemidesmosome.
Okay, so I have a question. What's the difference between a lamellar body and an adipocyte?
In here for these, okay, these are going to be in an adipocyte. In an adipocyte, the fat is going to continue to stay stored.
Okay.
Okay, and that's creating a lot of the underlying cushion, like to the skin, around the organs, and so forth. The lamellar body's job release that fat.
Okay.
Okay, release it so that we end up with those intercellular lipids. Their goal, because they're located in the epidermis, the fat that they have, release it. Because we are working to create an environment that is waterproof and barriers. Creating a barrier to anything that's here on the outside environment. This is just a little more information about our epidermis, the layers that we just talked about, and now we're going to move into the dermis and the other layers that are present. Oh, this is going over the thick and the thin skin. I kind of mentioned that earlier. The thick skin, like I was saying, we only find it on the palms, the soles of the feet, and that means we have all 5 layers. And the thin skin is the rest of what we have. Now, to note a couple of things. In the thin skin is where hair grows. It doesn't grow in areas where the thick skin is present. In the thick skins, okay, palms of the hand, our fingertips, soles of the feet. In the fingertips, have any of you ever looked at your fingers under a scope or anything to see your fingerprint? Okay. Well, next time we have our scopes out, when you've got the scanning in place, just take a peek. Okay? Because it's really cool to see your fingerprint. What purpose do fingerprints serve? Identity, because it's unique only to you.
Is it like traction for when you grab onto stuff?
Yes. Gives us the ability to pick something up. In the old days, now I'm talking older than me this time, okay? In the olden days, when criminals were doing stuff, they would literally pour acid on their fingertips because it would take their fingertips off, take their fingerprint off. They would not be able to, because, before we had DNA analysis and all this other stuff, one of the first things that came along was fingerprints, okay? Being able to pick up a fingerprint on something, all right? Well, when they learned that, they found out that if you put acid on the tips of your fingers, it would burn them off, burn the fingertips off. The problem was, once you did it, or if you did it too much the first time, the fingerprints don't come back. And your ability to pick something up became difficult.
I think that's so.
Hmm?
I thought that's why you got so.
There you, well, okay, yeah, this could be true. Some people can do that real well. So, yeah, so fingerprints. The way that we're going to get the fingerprints, the way that they're formed, is a connection between our dermis and the epidermis. You guys remember how I said it reminded me of egg crates? Okay? where it looks like the little things poking up like an egg crate, okay? That is from that dermal papilla, okay? The projection into the epidermis. So do you see how they're trying to represent all of that here, these projections? Those projections create our fingerprint, which is kind of cool. Yes, the dermal papilla are what give us our fingerprints, which I think is kind of cool. So, I sort of mentioned that the outer layer, that corneum, okay, that it's a thick, hardened layer, all right? One of the things that can happen, you can form a callus, all right? And then when it occurs on a bony prominence, which is usually on the feet, the rubbing of shoes can help cause it. They term it a corn when it's over the bony prominence. So that thick outer layer. So thick skin, thin skin. Oh, skin color. That's right. Haven't moved into the dermis yet. I'll talk about some of these cells. Skin color. Now, there are 3 factors that contribute to skin color. We have pigments, okay? Whenever we hear that term, okay, pigment means a color. The blood that circulates through the skin, and then the thickness of that stratum corneum. Because this is where we're going to find a lot of the melanocytes as they're moving upward through the layers. The pigments that we can find. Melanin. This, of course, like I've mentioned before, helps give protection against UV light. It is a group of chemicals that comes from an amino acid, the amino acid tyrosine. The colors range from brown to black to yellowish to reddish. The more you have, the darker the skin. Melanocytes and their structure that exists, okay, it's actually a pretty cool structure that we get. They're going to be a cell that have these processes that can extend and pinch and break off and so forth. So it's really cool what happens. Albinism. You ever heard of this one? Okay. This would be none of those pigments. Okay. They wouldn't be present. It is something that happens due to genetics. If I'm not mistaken, it's a recessive genetic disorder that happens. Now, we could also find that hormones, exposure to light, some other factors could contribute to the different skin colors. Now, another pigment that can affect our skin, keratins. All right? When you think about the carrots, the squashes, and so forth, all right? When it accumulates, because these are very built up in fat cells, well, one of the things we find in the skin is the little fat cells, okay? And therefore, when they get too full, and then you got to think about those little lamellar bodies, those little lamellar bodies have to store it and release it, okay? This is often the reason, you know, like little babies, for example, when they're first beginning to eat like the soft food and so forth, and you know, you're trying to feed them stuff, especially like the greens, you know, like the peas and the